You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show with your host, Bryan Callen.
Once again, we are here, mixed martial artist ready.
Yeah.
Practicing, getting our belts, trying to get, you have a criteria for, what the belt system is or how one gets their black belt in mixed martial arts?
Well, I don't know about black belt. I don't think that there is alive in the world or has ever been alive a black belt mixed martial artist. I'm not one. That's for damn sure.
Well, we always talk about like you have a very organized brain. I don't care what you say. You pick up on things very quickly. Your brain is you're highly educated and you understand how to think about a lot of things, and you have perspective, and you have an ability to sort of to borrow Nate Silver's title. You can separate the signal from the noise,
right? And
all that good stuff, but. By your own admission, at the same time, you have plenty of things in your life that you're not functional.
Oh
with.
No, not at all.
And we're all that way.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, how practical are you? How And by the way, thank God you're not, because I love being around you for that reason. But yeah, I mean,
there is no one who can claim to be a black belt in mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
Mixed mental arts.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's the thing is to, firstly to this is not, I give no credit to my education. It was very expensive, but it deserves pretty much no credit.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think most of it,
Eton in Harvard?
Yeah, Eton in Harvard and studying and living with Jim Watson.
But it did give you something because it puts you in contact with other people that think.
The biggest thing, so I was talking to one of my students who ended up at Stanford about, what did I think was the best thing that had come out of going to Harvard. And the biggest and best thing that comes out of going to a fancy school is you're surrounded by people who go on to be very successful, and you've seen them vomiting on their shoes at 3 a.m. on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to be intimidated by someone when you've seen them vomiting on their shoes at 3 a.m. on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And, that's really what it is that, all of power rests on mystery. It rests on being able to hide who you really are and create this aura and facade that, you are Donald an eye god or the Wizard of Menlo Park or, this great business genius like Donald Trump, or pop celebrities, right? That you have this great, perfect life that's always fun.
Sure.
You're always hanging with your squad and you have your squad goals and whatever else it may be. Right. So the point is that when you hang out with these, at 18, I had the opportunity to live for a year with Watson of Watson and Crick, who co-discovered the double helical structure of DNA. And he was, to me, that was sort of my hero, star as a kid.
Yeah. If you want to talk about achieving something monumental and moving the needle of human progress forward, you have to he's got to be in the conversation. He and
I
Watson.
once had a breakfast with him where he literally had for the whole meal egg on his face.
There you go.
And the point is that when you have these experiences, you're like, oh, dude, you put your pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else.
Well, don't confuse the man with his accomplishments.
No, not at all. But you also, I can tell you stories galore about Jim Watson. Like I once asked him, so famously, there were 3 people who got the Nobel Prize for the double helical structure of DNA. It was Watson, Crick, and then Francis Wilkins. Wilkins had somebody who he worked with, Rosalind Franklin, who took the X-ray crystallographs that they got the structure of DNA out of, and, she died. She died of cancer, and she probably got cancer because of all the X-rays that she was exposed to. And so you can't win the Nobel Prize posthumously. If you're dead, no Nobel Prize for you. It doesn't matter what you did, what you achieved.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, no Nobel Prize for you.
Okay.
So Rosalind Franklin dies of cancer, probably in pursuit of getting these X-ray crystallographs. And it's always been sort of a scandal in science, she got cheated, she didn't get fair recognition, whatever it may be. And so I asked Jim Watson, what did you think of Rosalind Franklin? Which was the question that everybody knew you weren't supposed to ask, so of course I asked it. And he said, well, I think her problem was always that she was very plain.
There you go.
And
petty old
Watson. And there are all these photos. There's this great photo at Cold Spring Harbor of Francis Crick and Jim Watson, and they're talking to a woman, and Francis Crick is looking at her face, and Jim Watson is looking at her boobs. And they have this photo.
That would be me.
Yeah. So
Well, look, I mean, I'm reading Infinite Jest.
Yeah.
David Foster Wallace. I read the supposedly fun thing I'll Never Do Again, a collection of his essays. I've read a lot of his essays. I've listened to many of his interviews. I like him, and I am really enjoying Infinite Jest because I'm really taking my time. In fact, I feel like an 80-year-old who's retired and has the time to really, one of the I think in the sort of introduction of this book, I can't remember the guy who wrote the introduction, said, you pour over it like a Talmudic scholar would the Talmud. In other words, just really savor every sentence. And I am. I'm not reading it for any other reason than just pure enjoyment. But I'm really enjoying it, and Infinite Jest has its detractors, but for the most part, it's a real work of literature, and funny and, authentic and human and all the things that David Foster Wallace is loved for. He killed himself, right? I mean, I would look at that as my opus, and I would be, in my mind, I'd be like, well, I'm done. I've done it. And it wasn't enough. Yeah. It wasn't enough. So Watson comes up with a double helix and stays petty and probably didn't do a whole lot afterwards. I don't know how happy he was. David Foster Wallace accomplishes his monumental feat at a young age as a literary giant or whatever he was. And, it wasn't enough. Yeah. So it makes me wonder at times.
Well, but I think that's the point. All of these people are ultimately our relatives, right? There are 7 billion members of the human family scattered across the globe. Yeah. And like any of our relatives, they have their things that they're really good at.
That's right.
And then there are areas in which they are
We talk
not
about
so
it all
great.
the time. There's some of them are, we have rational sides of our brain and emotional sides of our brain.
Yeah. And really, we're all intuitive. There is no rational or emotional side.
Explain what that means.
Okay, so this is one of the most important things. This is actually going to be, I was encouraged by Elliot, who's one of the guys I correspond with on Twitter, to create a belt system for mixed mental arts. So I did that, and I put up the white belt. The distinction between a rationalist and an intuitionist is something that is going to be like a green belt or something. So this is quite an advanced lesson that we're getting into.
Are you guys ready? First of all of you bow collectively.
Bow in.
Hey, Jumbi. I think in Taekwondo we used to say Jumbi.
Jumbi
means ready.
Yeah, prepared.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the distinction between rationalist and intuitionist. So this all goes back to our buddy Descartes. René Descartes, right? So, there's a book that came out, written by Antonio and Hannah Damasio, and it's called Descartes' Error. And what is Descartes' Error? And Descartes' Error was this belief that somehow humans had this thing called reason, and they had this thing called emotion, and that they were separate. Now think about what that.
Well, I was raised that way.
That's what we were all raised on.
Don't let that. Don't get emotional.
Exactly.
Reason. Take the road to Athens, not Jerusalem. My father loved to say that, but emotion was always considered a weakness.
Yeah.
Certainly with all the British and everybody else, it was all your emotions should be kept in check,
and you should keep a stiff upper lip.
That's right.
So there's this idea, which is a very Western idea, and it dates back to Descartes, that reason and emotion are these two separate things. Now, think about that in terms of the brain, how strange that is. There are these two parts of the brain that are somehow completely separate. They're not connected or anything like that. And Descartes understood that that was a problem. And so he said, they interface at the pineal gland, which he had no idea what the pineal gland was. He just, brains had been cut up and they'd seen that there was this weird little gland. In fact, the pineal gland has nothing to do with connecting reason and emotion.
Leave it to arrogant Descartes.
Exactly. But this is a guy who's, trying to make up explanations and essentially, 400, 500 years ago. So how much credibility should we be giving his theories about the brain this far on?
Sure.
None. is the answer. And so beginning in the 1970s, this whole rationalist idea that there is this reason thing and this emotion thing started to break down. And the first person who really started to break it down was Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
From Thinking Fast and Slow.
That's right.
Won a Nobel Prize for this, right?
But again, Amos Tversky died, and so didn't get a Nobel.
Okay.
So there you go. There's a pattern. But the difference is that Daniel Kahneman...
Don't die. Hey, be healthier.
That's right.
Hey, live longer. Hey, don't be so weak genetically. Fucking don't be so weak physically. Get longevity. Move to Okinawa. Eat blue potatoes.
Eat blue potatoes.
And have strong family bonds and friendship communities.
That is the key, Brian.
Keep going.
But the difference is that Daniel Kahneman would be the first, I think, probably to, from what I've read of him, to credit Amos Tversky for his work. Yeah. So they at the time were in Israel, and they were psychologists, and they were trying to study how people think, and so they essentially started to discover that we
More Nobel Prizes to the Jews.
Oh, again.
Outrageous. It's a Zionist conspiracy. The Jews have done it again.
There's so many Zionist conspiracies. They're everywhere.
It's just because, they got the fix in. They
exactly.
own. Nobel was a Jew.
Yeah, and if there's anybody who's known to be Jew-friendly, it's Northern Europeans.
Yeah, all the Swedes up there. Exactly. Yeah, anyway.
So they basically found that there are all these biases in human thinking, what they called heuristics or mental shortcuts.
Right.
So, for example, there's loss aversion. So we feel a loss much more strongly than we feel a gain, which is why people hold onto stocks way past when they should ditch them, because they keep on thinking it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around. But if they cash out, essentially, if you collect your shitty, crappy chips...
Fighting and wrestling is the same way. Boxing, you get caught with a good left hook when somebody does a pattern on you, you're not going to get caught with that hook again. You're going to be looking for that hook. And if the other guy's really good, he's going to make you think he's going to give you that same thing, and he's going to hit you with the right, But that's how you get better.
Yeah, there's a really strong loss aversion. There's also what's called the anchoring heuristic, which is basically that people tend to anchor their estimates around what is being talked about. So, for example, there's one of the tests is, how many countries are there in Africa? And if I say to you, is it greater than or less than 10?
It's greater.
Okay. And, then you give me a number. What do you think the number is?
I think it's 22.
Okay. Now, on the other hand, if you ask people the same question, you say, how many countries are there in Africa? Is it greater than or less than 75? It tends to be that their estimates tend to be higher, right? So they would give a higher number because they're now trying to think around the number 75.
Right.
So it shifts their estimates.
Yes.
So there are all these heuristics that are worked into human thinking, which arose out of evolution and all had some sort of evolutionary function. So that's Kahneman and that's Tversky. And they're the ones who really start to figure that out. But the interesting thing is, even though they're psychologists, the place where their work has the biggest effect is in economics. Because the core idea in economics, classical economics, was rational agent theory, which is the idea that people are rational.
Yeah.
And there's a whole, this is really that's what mainstream economics is. If you guys are wondering how are economists trying to decide how to run the economy, well, the big question you should be asking is, what is their most basic assumption about human nature? And their basic assumption about human nature is that people are rational. And this is a huge problem.
Yeah.
And we talked about this before with the invisible hand wave, that story. So Richard Thaler is at dinner with a psychologist. And
Richard Thaler being a behavioral
economist who all of his work draws off of Kahneman and Tversky. But so he's at dinner with this psychologist, and he's at dinner with this classical economist. And the economist is going on and on and on about how stupid people are, right? His wife is stupid, right? She buys a car and then she doesn't drive it, which is, ridiculous. She's paid for the car. Of course she should drive it. She just doesn't want to ding it, but that's not economically rational.
Right.
And then, he's talking about his students, how stupid his students are. Oh my God, they can't even understand the most basic economic concepts. They're so irrational.
Right.
And so the psychologist leans over and says, how come all the people you know are idiots, but all the people in your economic models are geniuses?
Exactly. Are really rational and behave like robots.
Exactly.
But having said all that, there is something that has been gained and continues to be gained by keeping the emotions in check and letting the irrational mind win, or at least trying to overcome your emotional side with your rational side. I mean, I'm thinking of the progress made by countries and cultures like Japan, like Germany, like the Britain, like the United States. I mean, the whole notion of even the Judeo-Christian ethic, or really any religion, the idea that the appetites have to be conquered and won over by that thing called self-control or character or righteous practice. These are the things, in many ways, one could argue, have given us the goodies. This is the life well lived. I mean,
but Brian, there is a chasm of difference between understanding that we should manage our emotions and thinking that there is this magical state where we don't have them.
That's right. That's
right. And
you're talking about getting to self-knowledge.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, to suggest that we're not emotional beings is to then only look at half the equation.
Well, and fundamentally to fool ourselves into thinking that what we're saying is us being rational, when really we're being emotional and we're rationalizing. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we're going to talk about family, we all know members of our family who go on and on and on about something and think that they're being totally rational and making perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And everyone else in the family is like, you're clearly very emotional about this,
right,
but you think you're being rational.
Right.
And that is the trick that the human brain plays on you, is that it creates this feeling that you are being rational.
Right.
So this is, Jonathan Haidt, and this is part of the white belt in mixed mental arts. Jonathan Haidt talks about naive realism, which is that he nominates that for the greatest obstacle to world peace, which is this tendency of the human brain to think that we see the world as it truly is.
Yes.
And we never do. Yeah. It's impossible.
I had such an experience like this when I was, I've been pretty vocal about my criticism not only of Donald Trump, but, then privately I lament and talk about how people, if we do vote him in, that's what we deserve, and I'm pretty critical of Trump voters. Well, it's very unfair because I had two experiences. One, I was listening to the BBC and they were doing an expose on the massive amount of opiates mm-hmm. that are being abused in the Appalachians. Mm-hmm. In coal mining country where physical labor caused a lot of people to look for medicine that could keep them pain free. When you're working that physically, you get broken feet and hands, but you've got to keep working. So OxyContin and all those things that came along. Then, of course, you get hooked, and then you look for something better. Now, and heroin is a major problem. But also, compound that with being a prideful Virginian or a prideful, Kentuckian or whoever it is, working your ass off, doing the right thing, providing a good middle class life for your family through blood, sweat, and tears. And because of a lot of things, the coal industry gets decimated by the rise of China and a lot of things, and your economy sucks. And 8 years on after Obama, you realize that the government can't do anything for you. Certainly not that government. And then along comes Hillary Clinton, basically saying the same things Obama was. Can you blame them?
Of course not.
Can you blame them for voting for Trump? Is it a desperation vote? It might be. They're just trying to vote for anybody who might make a difference and give them some dignity.
Yeah,
they've been so humbled. So what I said to myself was, I don't know anything about those people, mm-hmm. and I have no right to judge them. And I certainly have, for me to sit here with my great life and to say that you're dumb for voting for Trump or uneducated is wrong. It's actually wrong. Yeah, I'm right, but in a way I'm wrong. I'm right that Donald Trump isn't a great candidate, in my mm-hmm. opinion. I'm right that I think he's blah, blah, blah. But for me I have to understand that there is a very rational, emotional, and a lot of other holes to vote for him, for those people.
There's no, that's the point. I don't think that there's a rational reason to vote for Donald Trump anymore, that there's a rational reason to vote for Hillary Clinton. There are reasons to vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or any of these guys that fit within your intuitions. They fit within your beliefs. They make a certain sense, and it's plausible to believe that they're going to work out for you.
Well, but and also people have such radically different experiences with the world in front of them. My buddy who's black works with. I'm trying to help somebody who just was in jail for 10 years, and I'm trying to get them out and get them started. And he has a lot of experience with it. He was in jail himself, but he knows how to talk to a lot of these men who come out with not a lot of options, blah, blah, blah. But he was explaining to me that he asked me what kind of crime it was. And he said, well, it's good. The guy didn't do anything with a gun for a lot of reasons. And he can place him and help him. And I was talking to him about what he deals with. And what he deals with a lot of times is a 17-year-old kid who has a hair trigger temper for a lot of reasons, probably because he just wasn't taught how to behave, because he was told he doesn't matter, because of 1,000 things. He's sitting in Walmart in his car, his girl's shopping, he's 18, cop comes up and says, what are you doing here? You live here? And the kid goes, do I look like I live here? And the cop goes, watch your mouth. And he goes, I didn't even fucking say anything, motherfucker, or whatever he says. And the cop goes, you swearing at me? And he goes, I ain't swearing at you. And all of a sudden now he's you can hit him with assault. You can hit him with, resisting arrest. You can hit him with a lot of things. Now he's got a court date. He's got to miss work for a second time because he's got to go to court date. And so it goes. We know how it goes. Can't get a job, loses his driver's license and everything else. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what that experience is for the average black person in Charlotte, in Kentucky, in Tennessee. I don't know what it is like for them to be in Florida. I don't know what it's like to be very black, to be and with all that comes with it, the legacy of that. So when I see people flipping out at, in Charlotte or in Ferguson at the police and marching and overturning cars and stuff, I instinctively side with the police because I'm a white guy, not because I'm prejudiced, but because I want law and order. I get nervous that we're going to have some kind of an upheaval. When, in fact, as I hear stories like that, I think to myself, I would be the exact same fucking way. And I'm not 18, I'm 50. If you want to take my power away from me, I go crazy. My son, for example, in school now is not able to be a boy as in how I define it. And I blame a lot of, I have all kinds of opinions. I'm sure I'd have my mind open. But the point is, I feel like I'm living in a feminist fantasy and that boys can't be boys. And it makes me so crazy and so murderous because I can't fight back because I'm fighting. I'll try to fight back, but I'm dealing with a movement here. Yeah,
you're fighting against the whole culture.
Yes. I'm sorry that was a long, drawn-out thing, but the point is, as I get older, I start to realize how little I know, and certainly how I have to be careful before I even offer solutions for what I see as big social problems.
Well, I think the main thing is that, yes, that is the appropriate intuitionist response, is to recognize how little you know.
Yeah.
But again, we come back to that idea of, although you may not have had the experience of, being black in Charlotte or wherever, you are a human being.
I can empathize.
And you can empathize. And you have that shared humanity, and you can understand what it is like to be robbed of your dignity. You can understand what it is like to be in fear for your life. You can understand what it is like to have...
For both sides, for cops and for...
100%. Yeah. And so... that's the whole point, is that we have the ability to step into other people's shoes and understand emotionally what those experiences are like, especially if we engage in the sort of conversations like this where we talk and we're open. Mm-hmm. But crucially, that does require this intuitionist perspective. It requires understanding that how we see the world is not necessarily as it is. It's a series of perspectives and a series of feelings and a series of emotions. Beliefs, and that we are all being driven, our elephants are constantly driving us in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And so this gets on to Jonathan Haidt's work, where he describes the brain as being like a rider and an elephant. And that is what thinking fast and slow is about. So we have the brain has this big fast system, which is the elephant. It's large, it's clunky, it's driven by culture, prejudice, belief, all of that sort of stuff. And it has certain places that it likes to go. And then on top, there is this reflective system, and that system is the rider. And the rider has very little control over the elephant. But with patience and with time, if it watches what the elephant is doing, you watch what your own mind is doing, you have the ability to nudge it and nudge it and nudge it and nudge it and nudge it onto a different course. And this is the foundational insight of Buddhism.
I just love this, though.
Yeah.
I love, we should pause and talk about this a little bit more, because that is something that I have, if I really were to put a number on it, the number of hours I've actually thought about doing that is very small. It might be 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I have tried, and because I've had those reflective moments, or those sort of like where I say to myself, the things I think about are so ridiculous, and they all come back to me feeling powerless.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that institutions, ever since I read Why Nations Fail, I'm afraid that our institutions are constantly, under attack, that technology is going to take my power away from me, and that I need ultimately to get myself a gun, a couple of guns. One would be, I got a couple ideas. First, I need a shotgun, sawed off, and a long gun. I need an AR-15. I'm going to go through why. I need a shotgun. I need an automatic shotgun or semi-automatic shotgun with a large clip holder, so that I can load it with birdshot and double out. Double out. Don't worry about 100. You don't know what the fuck that is. But the point is, if I shoot one round
you're
into
gonna
a
love
car,
what I'm about to tell you.
If I shoot into a round of a car, say 4 guys who are trying to kill me, and they will be coming, and they're trying to take over my town, I can shoot into there and kill them. And then I need my AR-15 so I can mount up and just, I got there are a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Then I need my 22 with a silencer in case I have to go around as a quiet assassin. Now, if I spend a lot of that time, then for some reason there's a lot of time with me behind buxom women, just anonymous women, doing my worst. And then boxing, very important.
It's
again,
super important.
Well, head movement is everything. But ultimately knowing that my feet from years of Taekwondo would play a factor as well. And I still got some wrestling. So at 50, almost, I am very myopic. The elephant is really walking in a circle in a very small garden. It's a tea garden. It's a tea garden. My elephant doesn't go very far. My elephant's an agoraphobe. Okay? And that's the truth, and it's outrageous. Meanwhile, the reflector reads things like Infinite Jest and won't wear glasses even though I need them because, my God.
Yeah, it's male vanity.
I take great pride in the fact that I'm almost 50 and people go, you look 40. And by people, I mean girls way younger than I am after my show I'm sitting at a bar sipping on my beer. It's just so sad. I'm a sad person.
But Brian, so last night I was at the house of a guy who manages a gun store for a living.
Oh.
And do you know what he said?
What?
He said, I emotionally validate people for a living.
Oh, that's so great.
He sells,
oh my God.
He sells guns.
Yeah.
But really what he's selling is emotional validation. Of
course he is.
Which is the belief that if you own this gun,
you're safer.
You are safer. And also, fundamentally, you will be a Navy SEAL. You may not be able to run 100 yards, but you will be a Navy SEAL.
You're more of a man.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. My friend's father bought a gun, and his mother was all up in arms, and he had to tell his mother, he said, he's 65, he's 70. He used to be a tough guy. Now a 16-year-old can beat his ass. You don't understand what that's like for a man. He needs his gun. Because it restores his power. That's a big deal.
Well, 100%.
Because the idea of a man being held down while somebody does what they want to his family or whatever is his biggest nightmare. And by his, I mean Brian Callen's. These are how the question, Hunter, is how does one get his elephant out there?
Well,
first through self-reflection.
But it's all self-reflection. That's literally the great insight of all of this research is that the only thing that you will ever control is your ability to train your elephant. You have to watch your elephant. You have to see what it does. You have to reflect, and you have to understand, why is it doing that? Is that a thing that I want it to do? Does it serve my goals? So a great example of this, and it's important to understand, and for everybody to understand, you did not train your elephant. To some degree you did. You created some habits and all of that sort of stuff. But mostly your elephant was trained by your parents and the people around you.
Yeah.
Because you absorb culture. And if I may, I'd like to share a little poem on this podcast.
That's adorable. First, let me get my hand down my pants.
Well, so this is a poem by Philip Larkin, and it's called "This Be the Verse."
Okay.
It's one of his classics.
You're such an intellectual.
But wait till you hear this poem. Okay. Your mom and dad, they fuck you up. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults you had and add some extra just for you. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. So get out while you can and don't have any kids yourself.
What a cynical poem.
It's an incredibly cynical
poem. That guy
poem.
clearly didn't have kids, but it's great.
But the point is that I don't know that.
But that he's given up, right? And he's
well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the "don't have any kids yourself" part. But your mom and dad, they do fuck you up, and they don't mean to, but they do.
Sure.
And they fill you with the faults they had, and they add some extra just for you.
Yeah.
So you've picked up all sorts of stuff from your parents, and some of it's great, and some of it's not so great. And the job of our lives is to sort through the things that we've picked up from our parents.
And forget a lot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sort of not indulge in that, forget, and maybe think to yourself, maybe the answer is not attrition. You know, we do have this idea that we've got to tack on a bunch of traits and accomplishments. Accomplishment is great, but accomplishment is great insofar as it teaches you how to learn. It teaches you about life. It teaches you what's important. It's not so much that when you change your grip in tennis and you're obsessing over tennis and you win, and you're able to kind of overcome your own demons and beat somebody who's better than you at something. The trophy, as we know, is sort of not what you really need, but the acumen, the understanding that comes with putting yourself in a high pressure situation and performing is really actually how you get. I don't know about better, but certainly better. But better really might mean, better at the skill is not as important as the side effect, which is deeper understanding about maybe yourself or maybe about what really makes you tick and what's important. David Foster Wallace was talking in his interview with Charlie Rose. He said, I like talking to older people that have accomplished a lot because they get downright weird. And what he meant by that was that they no longer, what they set out to do and now that they've accomplished isn't what gets them out of bed. Now they need things like, I don't know, gardening or whatever it might be, you know, but it's something that is, again, maybe to borrow a phrase from Schiller, who I've never read, but I'm going to borrow, man is his most authentic when at play. The idea being play being what you do, you know, for the sake of its own doing. I like that because that's probably what never gets old. I'll never get tired of stand-up. And I swear to God, it has nothing to do with the love I get. You know, I'll be honest, like I was in Ottawa, I had a great show, and there was such a long line to meet me, and they were all so wonderful. But I mean a lot. You know, there's some people there are emotionally very fragile, and they come to my show and they say, your podcast is what keeps me going. You know, they hug me. All of that is not, it's not like there are droves of beautiful women and I'm having sex Mick Jagger style in my green room. It's dudes.
Yeah. And
it's an obligation for me in a way. I do it because it's a privilege. I do it because I want to do it. But it's not like it's woohoo. It's part of the job. It's part of the service that I feel that I owe to them and that I'm happy to do. But the thing that I get from stand-up isn't that. That's nice to be loved, but you get very inoculated to that. You come to expect that. What you never get tired of is discovery.
There's the joy of the hunt.
That's right.
The joy of trying to get better. But I think to piggyback back off of what you just said, what you're seeing there after your stand-up shows is the hunger for tribe. And that is so much of what is missing from the modern experience.
That's why it makes my money.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, 4 million downloads. We need to get this thing. By the way, also, more and more people come up to me after my shows and are loving this podcast.
Good.
That guy, Hunter's so smart. But yeah, that's clearly what's driving the popularity.
Yeah.
It is a tribe.
And that's what people need, and that's what people hunger for. And our tribes don't do a very good job of providing belonging and meaning. I mean, I had breakfast this morning with somebody who works in Compton, and she counsels kids who have been emancipated. You know, they're not technically. Anyway, I won't say any more because it's private. But the point is that what the whole point of the gang experience is that it offers belonging and community and all of that sort of stuff. Yes, it's about making money, but fundamentally, it's about so much more. The same thing.
Well, my buddy, I don't know if you met him, but he went to jail for 5 years for drug trafficking, but he worked with real mafia guys. He was with the real deal guys. He was a big-time drug trafficker. Got put in jail for conspiracy, racketeering, and drug trafficking. I mean, they tried to get him to turn on some big-time people. He didn't. But he said that the first time he was working with these guys, and they gave him responsibility, and he did a good job. They were like, "This kid's great," and he was like, "These guys are better than my dad.
Yeah,
they really like me."
Yeah,
they did really like him. It was belonging is a huge part.
It's huge,
yeah.
Huge. And our elephants crave these things and are drawn to it, and then they find where it is, and then they keep on going back to that thing, even if it's not necessarily in the most healthy or productive way. So. But, your elephant, my elephant, all of our elephants are going to be doing these things. I told the story before on this podcast about how my dad and I would race through dinner and then race through dessert, right? And because, we wanted to get to that last piece of pie. And my mother would sit there and be like, "What are you two doing? Like, this is so weird. Why are you racing through your food?" And ultimately, she came to realize that I had picked it up from my grandmother. It had been passed on from my grandmother to my father and from my father to me. And it was because my grandmother had lived through the winter of 1944 and the hunger winter, which was this Dutch famine that happened at the end of the war. And because of that, she had all sorts of weird food control issues. She got very emotional around food, and she was very protective of it. And every time she would make dinner, if there were 4 people, there would be 4 pork chops. And then, she would put out the side dishes. And then as soon as everybody had fed themselves a little, she would control it. And then she would whisk all the food away. But she used to padlock the fridge when my dad was a kid.
Wow.
And so what my dad used to do is he would sneak into they had this, because, my grandfather was a doctor, so they used to go to dinner parties and stuff like that. So they had this cupboard full of chocolates. And so my father would go into this cupboard full of chocolates, and he would unwrap the ribbon on the box of chocolates. He would undo the cellophane. He would open it up. He would lift off the lid. He would lift off the top layer of chocolates, and then he would eat the entire bottom layer.
Nice.
And then reassemble the entire thing perfectly. Right. And he pulled this off for years. And then one night, right, they're at another dinner party. My grandmother hands over this box of chocolates. And, her hostess, very embarrassed, says, "Margaret, I think you should know that your chocolate maker is cheating you. He's only giving you 1 layer of chocolates." And instantly everybody knew it was my father. But
Son of a bitch.
But so the point is that there, all sorts of weird food issues that I'd picked up that had, been passed on long past when they made sense.
Yeah.
50 years after World War II, I'm still doing that, right? But this is not a unique thing. We all have all sorts of weird stuff that is passed on from our parents, our grandparents, and things like sexism go back to the rise of agriculture. Racism is hundreds of years old.
But
these honor cultures that we talked about with Richard Nisbett, that is hundreds of years old. So East and West, those basic cultural differences are thousands of years old and go back to the rise of rice agriculture. So there are these cultural patterns that are passed on on and passed on and passed on. And from a young age, our elephants are trained to be able to do certain things. And they used to make sense, the things that our elephants did, but now they don't. And so we have to reflect and understand where those things came from so that we can then begin to train our elephants.
Right.
And that's the process of breaking a habit. It's not that I have this...
I don't know if my elephant, I have to say, like, one of the main sort of nagging impulses or one of my main nagging needs is the idea that I want to, I think, do something, create an opus, an artistic opus, do something that's really groundbreaking, whether that's writing a script or, or just stand up that's, that's original, and it's so fucking hard, but that certainly is a nagging need, and I don't think it has so much to do with recognition. Of course it does. I'd like to be recognized and respected and stuff, but I think it has more to do maybe with the idea that I believe it's inside me, and if I don't get it out, it's going to be a sin. So I have some religion in there, maybe that's my quest for immortality. So I don't put it out as just a comic. Or maybe it doesn't matter what it is.
Does it make you happy and does it make you productive? I think that's the question.
Probably. Yes.
So then there you go.
Yeah.
So then keep it. Yeah. That part of the elephant
and
doesn't need to be retrained.
And it may be an illusion. I mean, see David Foster Wallace and see many other,
But the reality is that, the Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, the worst thing is to not have a purpose.
Yeah.
So you could question that purpose away.
Yeah.
But I don't know why you would do that to yourself, frankly.
No, exactly. I agree with you. This is where psychology gets a little, masturbatory, and I don't know how.
Well, potentially. It depends on the psychology that you're talking about. I mean, Viktor Frankl was a psychologist.
Yeah.
And I think there are different types of psychology. There's the sort of masturbatory, why do you
he was in a
freaking concentration camp.
I mean, he basically said, if I can suffer with dignity, that'll be a huge accomplishment. I mean, that's when you have nothing else, at least you can try to suffer well.
But the point is that I think that if you look at Viktor Frankl, Martin Seligman, who's the founder of positive psychology, there are a lot of these guys who are psychologists or William James, personal hero of mine.
Really?
Oh, huge hero. Yeah.
Is this Henry James' brother?
It is. It is.
And they say William James was the best writer in that family. Why a hero of yours, and why
because
William James?
His whole psychological. Firstly, I mean, he has lots of great insights, but the first one is that the deepest need in human nature is to be appreciated, which I think he nailed it. I think that's absolutely true. We all want to be appreciated in some way or the other, in the eyes of either our families. We want to matter.
Yeah.
So I think for that insight, which I'm sure you can find said other places, but he said it very clearly and succinctly. And then the other thing is that his whole school of psychology is pragmatism, which is that you can test these beliefs based on what they do for you. So what we just did. Okay, fine. You have this belief, you have this desire to get this great work out of you and all of that sort of stuff. We could say that's good or bad, but the real question is, what does it cause you to do? How does it make you feel? Yeah. What are the consequences of it?
I make a lot of people laugh.
Yeah. So
it's not a bad thing.
No. And it makes you happy. It gets you up in the morning.
Yeah.
It keeps you functional.
Yeah.
So I would say that, from a purely practical standpoint, that's a useful belief to have.
Greatest job in the world, in my opinion.
Same thing. I believe in germs. I believe that there are tiny microscopic creatures that cannot be seen by the human eye that make us sick, but that if we perform a magic hand washing ritual, that they go away and I don't get sick. And that has proven to be a useful belief to me.
That's
and I'm going to stick with it.
But there's empirical evidence for that belief.
That's 100%. Yeah. And, I've actually seen some of these things. I've looked through a microscope.
Sure.
I've done these experiments. So I have had some sort of direct experience of that. But there's no particular reason to abandon it. Same thing with vaccines. I feel perfectly comfortable. Have I read every single paper on vaccines? No. Have I had an adverse reaction from a vaccine? Yes.
You have?
Yeah. But the point is that
I was speaking to, because I was on with Dr. Drew, and I was saying that vaccines are great. And if you're anti-vaccine, you don't know history or science. And, I said, then again, we're being asked to have, kids are being given 64 vaccines. I can see how one would take a cynical approach to that, saying, how many of these vaccines does my kid really need? Or is this the pharmaceutical industry making a lot of money just injecting my kids with a bunch of shit he's never going to get anyway? I get that. I don't think you have to trust, the medical establishment with that. But we do know that the vaccines save lives. We also do know that they're injurious to. I mean, I guess the government's paid out $3.4 billion or something to injury lawsuits or something. I don't know what that means, but
there's always. I mean, they're very clear on the vaccines that there's a risk of injury, there's a risk of complications. Things can go wrong.
Sure.
None of these things is going to be. You can also, by the way, have all sorts of complications from taking antibiotics
and aspirin. 35,000 people a year or something die, or American.
There you go. Yeah. And there's the iatrogenic death. There's all these sorts of things. The reality
is
iatrogenic? That's deaths caused by doctors. They leave scalpels in you. They leave sponges in you.
Those doctors.
They forget to, administer an antibiotic. Yeah. There's all sorts of things.
But it doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. Chemotherapy is not pleasant, but that doesn't mean that if you have cancer, you shouldn't get chemotherapy.
Well, certain cancers at least, right? Yeah, I mean, Hodgkin's lymphoma or testicular cancer, these are highly curable cancers. Right. Certain leukemias, I mean, chemo works for those, so yeah.
The reality is that with any choice you make, you're making a choice.
Yeah.
And you're going to roll the dice and, you see how it turns out. Yeah. And you hope that you fall on the right side of the statistics.
That's right.
But, there are certainly better bets in all of these things than, and there are worse bets. Mm-hmm. But yes, that's sort of the real difference between rationalists and intuitionists is this idea of, is there such a state as pure reason, or is there always some sort of emotion or some sort of emotional state? And are we always being driven by the elephant, by our intuitions? Mm-hmm. And that, by the way, is not all the evidence, right? We come back to the idea of Damasio. And so Damasio had this famous patient who he called Elliot. Usually these patients are given some sort of pseudonym, right? Because, there's doctor-patient confidentiality. Yeah. So anyway, Elliot had a brain tumor right up in the base of his skull, right behind the bridge of his nose. And they had to remove it. And, after the surgery, Elliot seems great. His IQ is unaffected. He's cogent. He's clear. There seems to be no problem. It seems like they removed a part of the brain that did nothing. So Elliot goes on. He's living his life. Everything's going very, very well. And then all of a sudden, Elliot starts making these very strange choices. So he leaves his wife, who he's been happily married to for years, and marries a stripper. Huh. Even though Elliot is a financial planner, he gets taken in by a series of con men who rip him off from all of his money. Elliot sits at work, and he tries to decide where to go to lunch, and he can't do it. He starts at 11, and he tries to rationally sort through all the different parameters of what would be a good lunch spot. How long will it take him to get there? How many tables will be available, what sort of cuisine is nutritionally the best, and he essentially really tries to rationally solve the problem of what do I want for lunch, and he can't do it. He ends up sitting there for hours, and then all the lunch places are closed. And essentially, he then comes to Damasio and his wife, Antonio Damasio and Hannah Damasio, who are at USC, and he wants to get recognized for some sort of disability, so he can get some sort of help or something like that. And what they come to realize is that the part of the brain that they removed is the part that connects essentially the rider and the elephant. It's this very, very small part of the brain that is located right there, and it connects, feeling and thinking. It's the thing that brings them together.
Wow.
And the point is that if you think about a decision like, what do I want for lunch? It's not a rational decision.
It's not a rational decision, no.
You come up with rationale, you come up with rationalizations afterwards. Oh, it'll be good because, I might see my friend there, or, it's very healthy, or, it's affordable, or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. But the reality is you feel like lunch.
That's right.
You feel like Thai food, you feel like a salad, you feel like a steak, you feel like a hamburger.
Yeah, that's right.
And
you're willing to wait in line for it, or you're willing to, whatever 100%. It is. Yeah.
And without that feeling there, you actually can't make the decision. See Elliot.
God.
And so it turns out that Elliot, this part of the brain that he had missing, may have been the very same part of the brain that the most famous patient in neuroscience also had missing. Phineas Gage.
That's right. He had that nail go through his head.
Railroad spike.
Yeah, and he became an asshole.
He became a huge asshole. But it's very much the same situation as Eliot. So Phineas Gage was this super responsible railroad worker, like model employee, perfect guy, all this sort of stuff.
And then became a huge asshole.
Yeah.
But then what does it say about self-control? And what does it say about all these things that we've grown up trying to get good at?
Well, the point is that we do have self-control and we have the ability to manage our emotions. But some of the most dangerous people on the planet are the people who think that they have no elephant, who think that they are rational and that they are seeing the world as it truly is. See our friend the economist who, thinks that it's perfectly reasonable to have this rational agent theory model of economics because they really believe that they see the world clearly, they see the world as it truly is.
Yeah, you could argue that people like Napoleon were the same way. They I don't know, but there are people that have, if I'm emperor, the world will be better.
100%.
Let me impose my will because I know ultimately how the world should be.
And those people,
sociopaths,
a lot of these people who think that they're perfectly rational do the most damage in the world.
That's right.
Because they don't realize.
Give us some examples of people that do the most damage because they are rational. Godless typically, right? So you've got Lenin, you've got Stalin, you've got Hitler. These are extreme examples, but they were, in their minds, they were pretty rational. They were brutally rational.
But not a one of them was an intuitionist. So the fact is that, Stalin and Mao believed that human nature was 100% malleable. They believed in that blank slate. They believed that you could remake a human being to be whatever you wanted it to be. And the reality is that no.
That's why they had education camps.
And
the people that you couldn't re-educate because they were already damaged.
You
killed them.
Pol Pot was the same way.
Yeah.
So, the whole blank slate theory period of history.
Steven Pinker's good book.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's all a response to that sort of very simple rationalist idea that it's all essentially, stimulus response and that you can train a human being to be whatever you want it to be. And that's not true. Through will. And deprivation.
Will over reason, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the other great example I always think is Robert McNamara. Because Robert McNamara was
famous for the fog of war.
Exactly.
Secretary of Defense.
Which was the first example of why big data is a terrible idea. Because Robert McNamara was part of this group of statisticians known as the Whiz Kids. And the Whiz Kids, did these incredible things in World War II where they basically found out that most of these bombing runs weren't being completed. And it's because, understandably, these pilots would fly, they would get over Europe, they would get scared, they would say there was some sort of mechanical problem, and then they would turn back. So McNamara found this statistical anomaly and then solved it by always putting a supervising officer inside the plane. Oh, now you can't turn back, now you can't fake a mechanical problem. And so the bombing rates went way up. So that was McNamara's first success. His second success was at the Ford Motor Company, where Ford, Henry Ford had run the Ford Motor Company since day one. He refused to let go of power. He was a great businessman and all this sort of stuff, but, didn't really believe in accounting or any of these things. So there's this famous story about the accounting offices of the Ford Motor Company, which is probably apocryphal, but it does capture the state of the company, which is that McNamara walks in on the first day and he's like, okay, can I see your books? And they go, what books? He goes, your books, your accounts. And he goes, we don't have books. He goes, so how do you know how much money you have coming in and going out? And he goes, oh, we have the stick. And he goes, what's the stick? So they go over and they show, and they have a stick there. And marked on the stick is 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million.
Cars.
No, they have these stacks of bills all the way around. They go, yeah, we have the stick. And see, I put the stick next to the money that's owed us, and see, that comes all the way up to 8. And then I put it over to the money that we owe, and that comes up to 6. So that means
they had not bills, but they had money that they were.
No, they literally had a stack of bills, and they measured how high the
dollar
stack.
Bills, you mean?
No, like invoices, all that sort of stuff. So it would be like if you did your accounts, right, by taking all your bills and just being like, oh, it's 5 centimeters high, therefore I owe this much money.
So now McNamara comes in and restructures the Ford Motor Company.
And does very basic accounting, does all that sort of stuff, does very well, really turns Ford Motor Company. And they're like, wow, McNamara, is there nothing you can't do? They love these guys, the Whiz kids. So then they say, okay, McNamara, we want you to be Secretary of Defense and we want you to run the Vietnam War. And so he comes in and he runs the Vietnam War. And, he's got a thing that's worked for him. And like all people who have a thing that's worked for them, they're like, this worked before, I'm just going to do this, but more.
Yeah.
So he decides that he's going to run the Vietnam War entirely based on statistics. And he has a very simple, rational model for how this is going to work. He says, the Vietnamese, they're rational actors. And so they are going to keep on fighting the war until the death toll gets to a certain point.
And then they're going to stop.
Yeah. So all we have to do is we just have to drive the death toll as high as possible.
Nice. That's great. Not human beings.
Exactly.
Just statistics.
Yeah.
Oh my
it's statistics.
God.
So we're going to drive the death toll as high as possible. And at a certain point, they're going to quit. And then that didn't actually work.
No.
And in the fog of war...
General Giap said, if you'd looked at a history book, we would have kept fighting until every man, woman, and child was killed. We
100%.
had been fighting for our independence and our autonomy forever. So.
And at Christmas, I was in Vietnam, and I went with my family to the Cu Chi tunnels. Now, the Cu Chi tunnels are these tunnels outside of Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, and it's amazing. You want to talk about human resourcefulness?
Amazing people. Amazing people.
You want to talk about human resourcefulness?
Yeah.
They've took everything from the GIs, whether it was like shrapnel from a bomb, they made it into spikes.
Incredible.
They took, tires from cars and turned them into sandals. Every single thing that could be repurposed was repurposed.
They're amazing.
They turned the American war machine.
Great shots, too. Headshots everywhere, yeah.
But in the Cu Chi tunnels, they had this massive system of underground tunnels that was located right next to a U.S. Army base.
Yeah.
And so every night, they would come out of their tunnels and they would fire at this Army base. And all the Americans would hunker down. And then in the morning, they would go out into the jungle and they would try and find these people who had been shooting them. They must have left some tracks. No tracks. And so they just repeated this endlessly night after night. And they had this massive system of tunnels all the way around. And the complexity of these tunnels is amazing because you have to have places where you can cook and let out smoke, but then have the ability to cover over the smoke. Yeah. They often had the smoke where the smoke would come, but then it would funnel out and come out a mile away or something like that. They figured out how to live off tapioca in the forest. I mean, tapioca. Levels of human resourcefulness that are really...
I got to go to Vietnam.
It's amazing. It's really, really amazing.
I got to go there, man. I've always, they're amazing people. And I'm glad that their country's doing way better.
Hugely better. Amazingly better.
Yeah.
But so the point is that, tremendous resourcefulness. So McNamara's little mental model, which was, we're just going to drive the death toll high enough and they're going to quit, didn't work. And in the Fog of War, which is this famous documentary that they made after the...
Errol Morris?
Yes, I believe so, yeah. That they made afterwards, which was about, why did this all go so wrong? McNamara says, in the end, it was a failure of empathy. We did not understand that the Vietnamese people believed that they were fighting a war for independence, and that in a war for independence, the higher the death toll goes, the harder people fight.
Good on McNamara,
for
who was
admitting
so
it.
Criticized and hated. But good on him for at least understanding that.
100%. But again, the hope of history.
a million at least
Vietnamese died, and a whole bunch of American soldiers. Yeah. So, and the lingering effects of Agent Orange and all those sorts of things. So, but you would hope. I mean, the whole hope of human history is that we learn from these mistakes.
Yeah.
And the fact is that the lesson of that is that there are things that statistics can't capture. And that empathy is an important tool. But what has happened is that instead of learning that lesson, we've now doubled down on it. And now we have big data, which is the exact same thing as the whiz kids. And the whole idea is that we're going to find statistics that are going to capture all these things in health and school and all that sort of stuff. And math is a tool. And like any tool, it's good for certain things and it's bad for other things.
Right.
And for a whole bunch of human behavior is driven by emotions, like those desires for belonging and all of that stuff. And that's part of the reason why I think John Nagel, who we had on, who wrote the counterinsurgency manual and all that sort of stuff, stuff is so important
Right.
is because he understood that the war on terror cannot be run by statistics. That what you're trying to do is that, you're trying to separate the guerrillas from the people.
You've also got to know the culture. When you put your boot on an Iraqi man's head in front of his family, you created a blood debt. You got to know that you can't do certain things. And to our military's credit, I'm sure a lot of them learned that. I mean, that was out there, but far little too late. That's obviously you're dealing with human beings who are emotional. Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is you're trying to manage those emotions. And to be fair, I think the important thing to recognize with all of this stuff is that, the degree to what percentage of the U.S. military understands this. I think you're probably right, probably a fairly large percentage. But the U.S. military is limited by the wisdom of the American people. The American
and
people,
it's a bureaucracy, and it's chaos, and it's 1,000 things. Yeah.
But the American people they wanted blood.
Yeah.
And they still want blood. They still want blood in, dealing with terrorists and all that sort of stuff. And they don't understand that.
Well, I think that it's probably there's probably a large set of emotions and thoughts around the issue.
Well, sure. But the point is that if we look at fundamentally what are the plans of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in terms of dealing with ISIS, do you
rub them out, right?
Yeah.
Bomb the shit out of them?
Because, and that's the logic that plays well to a home audience, but it's not necessarily the logic that leads to an effective solution.
I always hope against hope that politicians are talking that way, and then behind the scenes they're going to be a little more nuanced. And
maybe. You can hope against hope, but,
Is Hillary going to win?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of people who like to think that Hillary has it in the bag, but I don't think that she does. If
the only person that would come this close to losing to Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton. Way to go, Democrats! You guys are, and the Republican Party is just, you guys got to get it together. Talk about a group of people that can't agree on a goddamn thing.
Well,
maybe it's good. I don't know.
Brian, that brings
Ted
up a
Cruz?
very interesting point, which I don't know if you paid attention to this on your Twitter feed because there are literally millions of people tweeting at you every day.
Yes, I'm
but
very famous.
Somebody tweeted me and suggested, out of the blue, I wish that you guys were running for president because I would vote for you in a heartbeat.
Yeah. I appreciate that. The problem is that the reporters dig into your personal life. I'm a piece of shit, so I can't do that. But thank you so much. I also think
So let me ask you this. That's an interesting question. So let's imagine, because Donald Trump almost brought up he did this weird dance around Bill's infidelity.
Yeah.
So, if Donald Trump tried to bring up your sordid past in a debate, how would you respond?
Oh, I would never, I wouldn't even have, I'd probably chuckle and say, hey, you know what? Ask my friends, ask my wife. There's no secret about who I am. I'm not a bad guy.
I feel like
I'm not a scumbag, but I would probably, it's out there. I'd chuckle. I don't know. I probably would admit to it. I think the amazing thing, the potentiality of you and Donald in a debate, is that you could get him into bro mode, where you just both start telling stories. And you're like, oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you about this one time at the Sheraton, right? I think the way to defend to debate Donald Trump would probably be Donald, I love the way you think sometimes. You'd be so much fun to be friends with and have a beer. You're wrong, obviously, but you always crack me up. Now, let me explain to you why you're wrong for a second, with all due respect. And then you flatter him first, and then he'd be like, oh, okay. And I don't think he's that smart. And I don't think he's, anyway, I don't want to go into it, but he speaks for himself. But I'd like to debate him.
I think that'd be fun.
Yeah.
I think that'd be fun.
He would be insulting.
Of course.
He would try to take me off my pins by insulting me in some way or another, and that wouldn't work because I'm way harder on myself than he is.
And because you're a mixed mental artist.
Yeah, and I'll beat his fucking ass. In his best day, I can beat him in a fight. I'll beat his ass, all right? I'll beat him up. That's the difference. I'll beat you up,
You're
bro.
perfectly comfortable beating up a 7-year-old man?
I'll beat him up at 50. I'll beat him up at 20. I'll beat him up right now. You take any time in his life, put me in
You'll still beat him up.
Put me in this room, and I'll beat his ass. I'll punch him right in the face. God, I'm tough as shit, guys, for an actor. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been an hour, and I hope you learned everything. Hunter Motz, once again. Bryan Callen. Thank you, sir.
And there's...
And go ahead and give us the website.
Yeah, I'm going to start blogging at mixedmentalarts.club.
Ooh, mixedmentalarts.club.
Yeah.
Be part of the club, guys.
And you can find out already how to get your white belts.
Yeah.
Yeah, white belts.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show with Bryan Callen. Be sure to like him on Facebook. Just search for Bryan Callen Comedy. And follow him on Twitter. Just search for @Bryan Callen. You can also find him online by visiting his website. Just go to bryancallen.com. Until next time, bye-bye.